Welcome back to DIVEBOMB IndyCar Podcast to review the Grand Prix of Road America, a weekend which felt like we had a bit of everything. We had a bit of weather to deal with, we had a wet to dry qualifying session, we had incidents all over the place, we had a massive crash at the start, but what we have had for the first time in 34 races is a victory for Will Power. It's been a long time coming. I think I said last week that a win is coming for Will Power amongst others, and I feel like a very long-deserved win has come. Very different outlook compared to Road America last year, where he wanted to punch Grosjean in the face, almost punch Sticks in the face, and even a year before when he almost wanted to punch Devlin DiFrancesco in the face. So a stark contrast for Will Power, but after what has been quite a difficult last calendar year, and he started 2024 very well, and this sort of solidifies that as he takes the lead of the championship standings.
Yeah, I mean, it was an absolute beatdown from Penske. It really was. I mean, it's quite easy to forget that they had some struggles on road and street courses last year. You know, Power made the Fast Six once, I think. Newgarden 3 times. McLaughlin a few more than that. But, you know, they have just achieved some pretty remarkable consistency. And I think their drivers kind of felt that this performance, obviously the performance they put in at Indy, it's kind of, you know, it's just proof after all of what has happened in the last couple of months with the push to pass saga that, you know, we don't need to cheat or break the rules, maybe more is a better way to put it, to succeed. And it was the first podium lockout. I don't know whether there's been one since then, but it was at least their first since 2017 at Sonoma, which was Pagenaud from Newgarden and Power. And it was only the 14th time that's happened in history. So it kind of puts into perspective what a remarkable kind of team performance it was from Penske. And of those 14, 10 of them have been from Penske. So, yeah, that says a lot, doesn't it? But Power, yeah, it was a really, really good week. And I think it has felt like that win's been coming. There have been a lot of near misses. Obviously, I think he's finished second 3 times in the early stages of this season. And the race was, well, he was actually running third for the majority of it, with Newgarden leading, McLaughlin second before those final stops. But the overcut was really, really powerful. Power stayed out 2 laps longer than McLaughlin, a lap longer than Newgarden, and overcut the both of them. We might get on to a bit, but the alternate tyres were causing some issues for some drivers, but Power held on to them really well, and yeah, put in a stonking in lap and had a gap ahead of Newgarden to really end that drought. And 34 races, it was the 5th among active drivers, 4 days over 2 years since that last win came in Detroit.
Andretti wiped out the podium amid a higher 2020, apparently.
Okay,
Herta
cool.
From Rossi from Hunter Ray. There you are.
Yeah, so it was yeah. so it was Penske's first since 2017. But yeah, as I said, it was a very rare achievement that it's only happened 14 times. Yeah, as I kind of touched on, there was that really poignant element to the victory. It's a very heartwarming win because of all that he kind of went through last year. I think it really is a caveat to being kind of winless for so long. If it wasn't for everything that was going on off track last year, there's every chance he could have won. And, you know, rightfully so, his focus was off track last year because at the start of 2023, for those who don't know, his wife Liz suffered a life-threatening infection. She almost died during the operation. And, you know, heading into the 2023 season, obviously Will was not going to be in the right headspace. And, you know, there was uncertainty throughout the year. Will this infection return? I think there were quite a few sort of scares through the year as well, including Road America last year. You know, I think as they were about to leave, she started having hallucinations. I think it shows a lot about just how close-knit they are as a family, that, you know, Will was booking private planes to allow her to come to races. But yeah, hallucinations was kind of how the whole thing started. And as they were leaving for Road America last year, it kind of returned again. So that was on his mind all of that weekend. And Liz is kind of credited for keeping Will kind of in check, helping to keep his emotions in check, because he is quite an emotional guy. He can get het up and angry, but she's kind of the person who's been there through his career to calm him down in that sort of situation. So it's just really nice to see 1 year on from, you know, he was questioning retirement. You know, what if something happened to her and then he gets into a crash? You know, he didn't want to face the fact of his son Bo having no parents, which is harrowing to think about. But it's just really nice 1 year later to see everything in check,
So for the first time in 34 races, Willpower was back on top. And if you want to represent Willpower on your top, why not get the Willpower cap from Formula Model Shop amongst all the other various different bits of merchandise you can get from Formula Model Shop? The best place to get all your IndyCar merchandise in the UK. They've added some new stuff recently. You can get the Catherine Legg jersey with all the elf branding on. You get the Joseph Newgarden Indy 500 jersey winner. There's plenty of stuff to look out for on there. So make sure you give it a check out.
You can use the discount code 5BOMB, all one word, FIVEBOMB, to gain 5% off products on the FMS site. Visit the Instagram highlights on the DIVEBOMB Motorsport Instagram for a link to an exclusive VIP section on the FMS store, courtesy of DIVEBOMB.
If you want a convenient way to look at our articles and then visit Formula Model Shop, you can head to the DIVEBOMB website where there is a big pink banner to link you to the Formula Model Shop website.
Stay tuned for exclusive giveaways, events, and other content.
Pretty fun race, bit of strategy, and I feel like for the second year in a row, someone pitting a lap too early really cost him. It was Herta last year, pitted a lap too early, which sort of completely derailed his race, and that was almost the same this year. The red tyres were pretty horrific for the majority of the field, and I think McLaughlin said he took them a stint too late, but to be fair, it was the same stint that Power took them, so I guess it was all about management really. And then McLaughlin made his final pit stop first. Newgarden could jump him, and then Power stayed out a lap longer, which meant he could jump him, which was pretty significant because it looked like for a while Newgarden had it wrapped up really, especially when he did the unfavoured red tyre at the start, and like most of the others, and obviously the cautions at the start, which we'll get into later, sort of massively played into his advantage, but didn't work out for whatever reason. I mean, Newgarden went off on turn 8 on his in lap, which cost him a bit of time. He almost had his own accident at the kink again after having a pretty hefty crash in qualifying, which thankfully he was all right from. But yeah, I mean, it looked like for a long time Newgarden had it wrapped up in his backup car. I mean, it looked like for half the race McLaughlin had it wrapped up after he jumped to the lead after the carnage at the start, which we'll get into later. So momentum sort of shifted each stint to who'd win the race, and yeah, it was quite an interesting strategy one. It wasn't one of those all-time crackers. It probably isn't one I remember in 5 years' time, but it was quite an enjoyable one.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I think Garden obviously started on the alternates, and it felt like because he kind of got that out of the way, cautions had played into his hands, allowing him to take them maybe longer than he would have done. You thought, okay, when he's on the primaries while McLaughlin and Power are running the reds, you're kind of thinking this is Newgarden's to lose. But yeah, he ultimately comes in a lap earlier on the primaries than Power did on the alternates. So I guess that's credit to Power for kind of his management. But yeah, Newgarden, I think he feels like they lost the race. He doesn't feel like, obviously content enough with second, the good bounce back from Detroit, one of his best results of the season. But yeah, I think he feels like they kind of misstepped a bit by coming in that lap. They could have stayed out for another lap or two because obviously they're on the more durable tyre, and I think there were issues with warm up, and drivers were complaining about it taking a while for tyres to come into temperature, and you were losing something like, I think, 3 seconds, Newgarden said. Just to finish second after the crash, I mean, it's huge credit. Obviously, the team switched to a backup car to have that same performance that he had in his primary car in the backup car. Super impressive. Yeah, remarkable that he could walk away from that. It was a very scary incident. Car kind of came to a stop quite abruptly with a little bit of air time. It was, a big one. So to bounce back in the race, I think that was really impressive. And McLaughlin, I don't really think, apart from maybe pitting too early, he ran a pretty good race. He made it up from 8th to 2nd at the start. He was one who put in a pretty good performance in the wet, actually. He's barely ever driven an open wheel car in the wet. To qualify 8th was a pretty solid effort. But just on a whole, Penske were in a completely different ballpark to anyone else in that field.
Let's go on to qualifying, and obviously that leads into turn 1, where completely wet at the start. FP2 was absolutely soaking wet. So a lot of people didn't run for the majority of the session, and then started off slightly raining in the group stages, and then raining but damp in the group 2. Sorry, not group 2, the fast 12 and the fast 6. Obviously, it sort of well, it was good enough for slicks, and it's quite an unpredictable session. And Newgarden's crash brought it to an end early, which left a pretty, well, not a pretty surprise, but a very surprise pole for Linus Lundqvist in his rookie season. Huge credit to him. It feels like Lundqvist is either absolutely on it or absolutely nowhere weekend by weekend. But he was on it in qualifying. Unfortunately for him, it all came a bit undone because Marcus Armstrong, who had his own career best qualifying in third, sort of slightly clumsily hit the back of him. Everyone was checking up a little bit, slightly clumsily hit the back of him. And then Newgarden hit the back of Herta, who was checking up. There's a lot of argument. Herta was very aggrieved that Newgarden didn't get a penalty. It's very 50-50. Herta was checking up to stop from the other two, but again, Newgarden was going quite fast into the back of Herta. He didn't react particularly quickly. Second time they've collided this year, so we'll see how that one plays out after their slightly controversial collision in Long Beach. Newgarden didn't get penalised. He actually ended up, I think, third or fourth on the restart, which worked out pretty well for him in the end. So, yeah, it's just a huge shame because Herta had so much potential, Lundqvist had so much potential, and Armstrong had quite a lot of potential as well. And they all just it was their fault, but they all managed to end each other's races pretty much.
Yeah, where to start with all of that? Let's start with the Ganassi duo because Lundqvist, I think his previous best qualifying or starting position for Ganassi was 17th. So, it was a big enough achievement just to make the Fast 12 for the first time. I think he qualified 11th in one of his races for Meyer Shank last year, but this was a massive step up. And he mentioned, as did Herta, the kind of conditions they'd been used to from racing back in British F4, British F3, where, let's be frank, there's quite a lot of rain. There was a sensational effort, I thought, to take that pole in such tricky conditions. We'll get on to maybe Kiffin Simpson and the rest of the Ganassi cars, but Simpson made his first Fast 12. All 5 Ganassi cars were in the Fast 12. But in the end, it was Lundqvist who kind of reigned supreme. But yeah, as you say, Dan, he's not always seemed to deliver. I think there's consistency to find, but this is a massive confidence boost after what was a pretty tough May for him with the 500, obviously having a couple of incidents there. And I guess likewise for Armstrong, he built on that result in Detroit really, really well. I think he was even a little bit disappointed with qualifying. He's not going to like being beaten by his rookie teammate, but that's still, I think, 5 out of 6 races. He's now starting inside the top 10 on road and street courses. Second Fast 6. Obviously didn't make one last year, so that was solid. But
the weather was, as you said, was mentioned by both Lundqvist and Herta. And we actually asked Colton Herta what made him so good in the wet, and was it a good nod to our good old British weather?
We'll take one off Zoom before we wrap up. Dan, go ahead.
Hi, Colton. Obviously, previously in the series, you've had quite strong success in wet conditions. So is it something that comes naturally to you? Is it the European style of racing that's helped you with that? Is there anything in particular?
I don't know. It definitely helped being in England for those years and driving a lot of wet weather days. That definitely helps. I think the driving style helps. I tend to drive a little bit more aggressive than a lot of people, and I'm comfortable sliding the car, so it kind of helps in that slippery conditions to find the limit a little bit more comfortably. I don't know. The cars were great today, and you see like wet or dry.
Yeah, the incident at the start, it was clumsy from Armstrong, but end of the day, it looked like Lundqvist had a bit of a wiggle, and Armstrong was kind of caught off guard. I think Armstrong just generally had the better start out of the two of them, and kind of on the run down to turn 1 looked like he was kind of hesitant, maybe wanted to make a move, maybe not, and yeah, ultimately ended up in the back of him. So that was a shame. That was an unfortunate one. And then obviously Herta, Newgarden. I don't think there's anything really that Newgarden could have done. Yeah, he was coming on fast, but at the end of the day, those checkup situations are so hard to read. You're so low down in the car. It's so hard to react. I think you can't really appreciate it. I think I can understand why Herta's feels aggrieved. And then he also had more contact with Lundqvist on the restart from that caution, was spun again. He'd already run wide and caused some debris that caused a second caution. It was just a disastrous start. But yeah, I do feel for Herta.
It's one of those where I think if it was penalised, I wouldn't feel that was undeserved. it's like either way, I don't think it's a dreadful decision to penalise. Obviously, Herta's going to feel more aggrieved because he was the victim. But I don't think either way that it's a terrible decision if he did or didn't get penalised. It's pretty...
Yeah. I also thought it was pretty harsh that Armstrong got penalised, actually. I think it was the clumsier of the two, and obviously it kind of caused the whole thing. But I kind of, because Lundqvist clearly did have a sort of wiggle that obviously kind of caught Armstrong off guard.
But if we're reading by the rule book, that was avoidable contact.
I guess it probably was, yeah. He was just, I don't know whether you kind of noticed the same thing, but Armstrong was running so close to, he definitely had a better start.
He jumped Herta, didn't he? So.
Yeah, and he was kind of just running right on the rear of Lundqvist the whole time. So, yeah, I guess you're kind of right. It was avoidable, but there was a bit of a wiggle there from Lundqvist that obviously it wasn't intentional, but it was just massively unfortunate. But yeah, I think just on Herta, I mean, just something seems to just go wrong every time he's starting at the front. I mean, it was another, I think it's now sort of 5 out of 7 qualifying attempts at Road America he's been on the front row, which is absolutely incredible. I think I've got that stat right. Yeah, that's 3 races in a row now. His own mistake at Indy, his own mistake in Detroit, and now just something completely out of control. And 6th place, to be fair, is an awesome recovery in the end. You know, he was even running in the lead at times off strategy, and we thought, you know, is he going to have the fuel to save here? But obviously that didn't happen. But finishing just behind Kirkwood by seconds was really good recovery drive. And you've got to feel if it wasn't for that issue, you know, he could have been right in the ballpark for the win and kind of only looked like the best guy placed to challenge the Penskes.
Herta has the pace. You can see it in qualifying. He's always kind of, maybe not ahead, but he can have the pace, but then he never kind of converts that into the race, I think, which kind of leads to this. And I think that's something that he needs to work on. I don't know how he would work on that, but I think that's just something that he needs to get right, because I think if he did, then he could be winning a couple more races at least. So I think that's just always something. I think that's something that happens with him.
Yeah, I mean, Herta's arguably had the pace of the field for the last few races, so to have nothing to show for it, yeah, that's pretty bad. Well, so it's not even. It's not even all his doing. That's the thing. Some of it's his doing, but I think yesterday just purely unfortunate.
I want to touch on Herta a bit more a little bit later, but in general, I think touching on Chip Ganassi Racing's pretty bad day is pretty ominous too. We had the caution for Herta's debris after he went off at turn 1. Then Kiffin Simpson that was clumsy. Christian Rasmussen sort of just drove into the back of him and spun him out. And then Scott Dixon, very un-Scott Dixon-like performance, really. He was running sort of top 5 and then put on the red tyre, and he just completely fell apart. He shredded his rear left in such un-Scott Dixon fashion. And yeah, he just, we thought he might end up one of his stupid strategies and come home to win. He didn't. Ends up 21st, which was pretty disappointing considering Dixon was a championship leader. We've had the championship lead change 3 times in as many races, and it sort of felt a bit disappointing for Dixon. It was pretty unlike him to have a pretty poor day like that. Alex Palou, on the other hand, pretty good day. It wasn't his best day, but he couldn't have really done too much different. He's had the Penske sort of in a league of their own, and very Palou performance. Didn't really see too much of him. Brought home a pretty decent 4th. Goes back up to, he was in second in the standings. He overtakes Dixon, but obviously now is behind Power. But, you know, overall, pretty disastrous day for Ganassi. Palou made the most of what he had, really. But as a team, I think Chip will be pretty disappointed.
Yeah, I mean, it was an awesome qualifying for them, obviously, wasn't it? With the
all cars in the fast 12.
all five making the fast 12, which is quite an achievement. I think, yeah, Simpson, you know, obviously he's come in with pretty lowly expectations. Some people kind of wrote him off before he's even set foot in the car. But no, I thought, you know, I think he was running fairly well early in the race. It looked like his tyres had gone off. I don't know whether he maybe did he start on the alternates? No, he ran on the primaries, but I think he said that, you know, I think he just said that his tyres kind of went off and he was having to hold a few cars off. But again, it was unfortunate, the whole Rasmussen situation. I guess it was a bit similar to the Lundqvist Armstrong one in a way, because I think it maybe looked like
I think Rasmussen expected Simpson to
it looked like
stay
he was,
left.
yeah, it looked like he was fading to the left, and then he kind of didn't. Then again, it was, I guess it was a penalty because it was avoidable, but it was another kind of unfortunate one rather than anything too massively untoward, I would say. But that's now 2 races in a row. You know, we've credited Simpson a lot for staying out of trouble. But unfortunately, he's been caught in 2 incidents that are not his fault remotely in the last 2 races. So that's a shame, yeah. But Dixon, the whole Dixon situation with his tyres was, yeah, very un-Dixon. Like, I don't know whether maybe he couldn't have done anything about it. Maybe there were just some dodgy sets, because I know Graham Rahal kind of earmarked these issues throughout, I think practice, and then again in warm-up he had some similar problems where tyres had basically just delaminated a bit. So yeah, that was odd, given obviously the harder compounds. This is the longest lap of the year, of course. But yeah, it just looked completely undrivable for Dixon. Ruined his race. Then yeah, just snowballed late on. Had that late pit stop, stalled. It was, yeah, not a good day, because I mean, last season we made so much of outside of Long Beach's his worst finish being 7th, and now this season he's got 15th at Barber, and now he's finished outside the top 20 here. So yeah, that's not great. And then Palou,
nothing to say. It's a good day.
It was that classic Palou day where, you know, he's very quiet, but you know, completely just maximizes everything, stays out of trouble. You know, he's just got that incredible ability to kind of just plug away and pull results out like that.
Carl Kirkwood's habit of top 5s being only wins is quickly dissipating. That name is coming off his reputation of another top 5. Was the very fortunate man who's managed to cycle past everyone at the start during all the carnage. Lost out to McLaughlin on the first restart. McLaughlin just got me to turn 1. Similarly to Palou, Kirkwood was quite quiet really after that. But you know, second week in a row, I feel like he's got a really solid result, as you highlighted earlier. He's got the best worst finish of anyone in the field, and he slowly sort of cycled himself up to 6th in the standings. He's got the same amount of points as McLaughlin. He's only 5 or so ward for 4th. Kirkwood's had a quietly really good year, and it was again, there's not too much to really delve into from this weekend, but he had a good result again.
Nice, neat qualifying session in tricky conditions, and yeah, got a really good start regardless of the incident. And you know, unfortunately, kind of dropped back a little bit, but again, salvaged the top 5, successive top 5s for the first time, and now has as many non-win top 5s as he does winning top 5s.
Need some more podiums though. In a year's time, your only podiums are wins, and they'll have to get some more podiums to beat that. I mean, I'm sure Kirkwood wouldn't mind some more wins over podiums, but we'll have to see how that transpires. Herta, obviously, you two sort of touching in. It's the 4th race in a row he seems to get involved in something or other. Unless did you get involved in something in Alabama too? Probably. It feels like everyone did that race, quite possibly. I think all things considered, 6th place is actually quite good though, considering where he was after about 3 laps. I think he drove with a bit more maturity. You know, we looked at Detroit and it went wrong. And then what does he do? He goes for an absolute ridiculous move in Palou to try and overtake him for 16th or something. Whilst here, you know, he went off strategy, a lot more composed. It wasn't really the stupidly, ridiculously aggressive Colton Herta we've actually seen a bit too many times. And, you know, if you want to be a champion, these are the results you need on bad days to claw someone back. And yes, he's going to be disappointed he didn't win, obviously, because he had a car good enough. But retrospectively, if you said you'll have 6th in the end of lap 2, I'm sure he would have been over the moon.
Yeah, he was clearly frustrated, wasn't he? You saw that after the race, but I think it's full credit to him that, you know, while he was obviously going to be frustrated in the cockpit after just about everything that could have gone wrong did go wrong in those early laps, he did appear to keep calm, and yeah, it's a good result, even if he is pretty annoyed with it still.
I think as well, it's just an achievement, just to work his way up. Like, even if it was a bit lower, just he was 27th right at one point towards the end, and you can't really say much. It was just an achievement in itself, like I said, to kind of go up that high.
One word answer: do we still see Herta as a championship contender?
I don't think I do. I think obviously this weekend was out of his control, but I think we've still seen too many of these. Oh, sorry, that's not a one-word answer, is it?
Yeah, you just need to say no.
I want to justify it, because I don't think it's a hard no. But no, I think we've seen too many issues still that have been kind of in his control, and he's recovered well from. Well, he's recovered well from what actually happened in the Indy GP. I can't remember.
He got hit by accident at the start.
Okay, so that wasn't his fault.
And had the fuel issue in qualifying.
So that wasn't his fault. When things haven't been his fault, he's recovered well, which is encouraging. When things have been his fault, he hasn't managed to recover, obviously, because he crashed out of the 500 and.
Well, he could have carried on.
Yeah, he could have done. But I think we just need to see proof that he can really execute in these high kind of big moment situations still, like we haven't in the 500 in Detroit.
Who do we still see as a championship contender? Obviously, Pillow Power Dixon. Outside that, with Newgarden with all the ovals.
I think Newgarden and McLaughlin are still outside contenders. I think with the ovals.
I think O'Ward deserves a shout with all the ovals as well.
Yeah,
he's still like, what is it? Still 6th in the championship, is it?
O'Ward is 4th in the standings.
What?
Currently.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, because it went higher. I was going to say that is impressive because I remember seeing it after the race and it showed it, and I was like, how is this still?
But like
high after some of his.
O'Ward, I'd probably say is the best oval racer outside of Newgarden, and he's ahead of both Newgarden and McLaughlin. So
yeah,
I'd probably say it's top 4, no, top 5 plus Newgarden. Who's still got
one thing I would say is the fact that O'Ward is 4th. That does kind of prove what I was saying about. I feel like consistency has not been as much of a factor through the field this year because O'Ward had a few pretty poor rounds in the early season, and here he is, and he's still 4th in the championship.
Well, you got the win, which wasn't a win. Which,
that's true.
Yeah, NBC are out here saying he was a championship leader, which just sort of annoying me because he wasn't really, was he? He was. You can't look back at the championship standings after another race and say, oh yeah, he led St. Petersburg, but he didn't because going into Long Beach, he didn't lead the championship. So, yeah, I mean, I feel like everyone's sort of had 2 or 3 bad races. Pillow, obviously Detroit. I mean, to be fair, there's a bit of a gap between Dixon and O'Ward. The first 3 are sort of about 40 points clear of the rest. But I think when you're looking at, O'Ward and particularly Newgarden, very good at Iowa. O'Ward's pretty strong at Gateway. Milwaukee's obviously a bit of an unknown, but when you're looking at them 2 for short oval, it's like you don't really know. But I mean, we'll obviously touch on that a bit later. But looking back down the field, obviously before that Herta's championship contender, I think P7 might have been a pretty underrated day from Romain Grosjean, bringing home Juncos' best result of the season. We'll get onto their week a bit later. But amid all their turbulence, I thought Grosjean brought home a very, very impressive performance.
And you've got to consider as well, he barely got any dry practice runs. He had warm up and that was it. He had a really heavy crash. Well, it was quite a heavy crash in the final corner in practice on Friday.
And do you remember how bad he was here last year?
Yes.
Like he went off the track at every corner.
That's really, this was the disaster weekend, wasn't it? Yeah.
This was the one where it really, really fell apart last year.
Yeah.
You were like, ugh.
So that's a really good point. So after that, and then considering the fact he had that it was pretty fast off. He went kind of wedged his front wing and front end in the tyres in final corner turn 14, is it?
Yes, correct.
So that was on the start of his first timed lap in practice. So that and then obviously rains on Saturday. You've not got much dry prep.
So it pretty much a warm up.
He felt the car was pretty good, I think, kind of straight off the bat in warm up, and yeah, ultimately kind of recovered really well across the weekend. His qualifying was decent, and then his race was beyond decent. His race was really good, and you obviously got the Arrow McLaren of Pietro O'Ward at the end. So
on the last lap, yeah.
So aside from the odd kind of off race, he's actually had a pretty underratedly under the radar solid start to the year. That's his second top 10.
He's ahead of podium Sida Lundqvist in the standings. He's ahead of VK in the standings. It's not bad.
Second top 10, finished 8th at Long Beach, and then also he's finished 12th twice as well. It's pretty good. He's quietly having a very good season.
He was ahead of Pato O'Ward, as we mentioned, who, I mean, he had a bit of a disaster start because he had to go on the grass to avoid a lap 1 carnage. He had started on the red, so when the caution came out, he was like, we're in the money, we can get these reds off and go on to the Blacksaw race, until the number 5 team forgot you have to do 2 laps on each compound, which meant he had to go on the reds again, which defeated the point of their strategy at the start. It was a bit disastrous, really, but considering where he was in lap 1, similarly to Herta, I think he'll be content with 8th, to be honest. Like, look, these days aren't ideal, but, you know, from a championship standpoint, it keeps in the mix. He's actually closed the gap to the front of the standings because Dixon had such a bad day. So I think, you know, similar to Herta, I think considering lap 1, he is not going to be too displeased.
Yeah, it's just a big error, isn't it? I mean, he could have been well in contention with that roll of the dice.
You're looking 4th, 5th, probably, really.
Yeah.
Through again, no real fault of his. He's been pretty unlucky. As though, obviously, I know Alabama, he was pretty disastrous.
Yeah,
but...
he kind of lamented the lack of any real clean race starts. And
yeah, I mean, it's the second race in a row. He's got caught in an incident pretty much through no fault of his own, and has recovered, I think, with a maturity that he sometimes lacks, if that's a good way to put it. You know, that we've seen times where he'll have a disaster race and will make it even worse by, a bit like Kurt, just doing something a bit silly. But he didn't do that. So
this is an honourable mention maybe for the funny moment of the weekend, but Rosenqvist replied to O'Ward's Instagram post, which kind of bemoaned the lack of a clean start, saying there's a higher likelihood of getting rich on crypto.
Connor Daly's got a word or two about that, probably. Then it was Marcus Ericsson. It's a bit of a Marcus Ericsson day. Didn't really see him too much, but
well, a Marcus Ericsson day though, I think is quite a positive for him, because we've not really seen many of those Marcus Ericsson days early on at Andretti that we kind of saw so often at Ganassi. So that's pretty good. You know, I think we can't really tell how he would have performed in qualifying. I think, where did he start? He started 15th, so that's not awful, but you know, he probably could have matched his teammates if it was dry. It kind of obviously was a bit of a wild qualifying session. Yeah, he seems to be getting more comfortable. I think having an Ericsson weekend does show that he is getting a bit more comfortable.
Rahal was 10th, who, again, pretty decent performance. He got punted off by Giotto. Well, we believe it to be Giotto because he got penalty for avoidable contacts, but we've never actually seen the replay. Anyway, he got punted off lap 1 and ended up 10th, which was a pretty good recovery. He's actually on the same points as the championship as Armstrong. Feels a bit random, you know, Rahal on the same amount of points as Armstrong, for example. And as I mentioned, Grosjean ahead of Lundqvist, but this is the way things work, really.
Under the radar. Decent
like
his race yesterday, really. He kind of got to 10th. It was one of those ones where you kind of don't know how he's really got there.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of drivers today. Lundqvist 11th. Lundqvist was running, felt like he was running a lot better than that rest for a lot of the race, but ended up on 11th. Again, there's not really too much to say about a lot of these guys. 12th was Pulse at Lundqvist. I don't think that's too bad again, considering lap 1. Porsche was 13th. I know he's had a bit of a tough week. We'll probably get onto that a bit later on.
Yeah, I would just say on Lundqvist as well. I'm just quickly getting his results up now, but that must be one of his better results bar the podium, I would say.
It's his second best result of the year, bar Ferrell.
Yeah, because this is the thing, because like he actually has had a pretty rough few rounds, actually.
Yeah, as I said at the start, it's either like he's on it, like at Thermal, like at Alabama, or he's just absolutely nowhere. So it's rookie syndrome, that's what we'll call it, for Linus Lundqvist. 14th was Felix Rosenqvist, a pretty quiet day. He got caught in a bit of a weird incident with Stingray Rob. It's something we haven't really seen from Stingray Rob, a bit of overstepping the mark, but he got a penalty for it. Anyway, talking of Rosenqvist, we spoke to him midweek about his tyre stint at Detroit, about his expectations of MSR and the news in the 66 car.
Go ahead and open it up for questions. Again, if you have a question, hit the virtual raised hand function here on Zoom, and let's begin. Overseas, Dan Jones, DIVEBOMB Motorsports. Go ahead, Dan.
Thank you, Dave. Hi, Felix. First of all, well done on the Detroit weekend. I believe you did a 56-lap stint on the end on your tyres. So if you could just take us through that a little bit and describe how the tyres are feeling at the end.
Yeah, it was an interesting race, man. Like from the cockpit, it was kind of like playing chess because it was always kind of risk versus reward, and ended up in the end there in a scenario where we either had to go on the reds for 30 plus laps or stay on the tires we already had, which had 20 or something. I mean, obviously a lot of those laps were in yellow. But I didn't want to risk putting on the reds because I had a really bad stint on them early race, and I actually didn't know it was going to be that number. I just said like, hey, let's stay on these, and we just did a splash with fuel, which is the first time ever I've done in IndyCar actually. And yeah, they were kind of falling apart. I mean, we couldn't really do anything exciting in the last stint, so we kind of just banked on our top 10 basically at that point. Which after a day like that where you're one second you're a hero, next you're last, you have a puncture, you're on wet tires. Like you don't really know where you're going to end up. And I'd say at that point we're kind of like, hey, let's take this top 10 and just move on to Road America. But it was quite exciting, actually. Even it's a shame we had so much yellow, but the kind of game from the pit wall between pit wall and driver was actually really exciting.
And you're now sort of 6 or 7 races into your career of Meyer Shank. How do you reflect on it? Do you think it went slightly better than you envisioned when you signed for the team?
Yes, I think for sure. It's kind of hard to set expectations when you change teams. You're definitely careful doing that. But it was clear pretty early on that we had pace pretty much on all kinds of track, and including Indy now with the oval, which is hugely exciting. I'd say the exciting thing is also we're getting better every week, and even if we didn't really have the pace in Detroit, which I think was a bit of an outlier, I feel like we do a really good job at getting better if we're struggling a little bit with the pace, and the pit stops have been a lot better through the year as well. I think we were one of the strongest in pit lane in Detroit. So it's like even from qualifying perspective or points perspective, we're good, but behind the scenes, there's a lot of exciting stuff going on as well.
And obviously in the last week, there's been a bit of uncertainty around the sister car. So I just want to see, have you had any involvement in that, and has that affected the mood of the team in any way?
I mean, I'm not really involved. Mike and Jim makes all the calls, and obviously they're the ones who run the team. It's unfortunate, obviously, when you have that going on. It's not the ideal scenario, but I feel like everyone has taken it pretty well, and we're Elliot's going to run this race, and I honestly don't know what's going to happen after that, but I'm sure they have a good plan in place, and I'm a good buddy with Tom, so obviously I was bummed to lose him as a teammate, but it's business, and he's still part of the team, and the future is for sure going to be bright for all of us, I think. So we'll see where it goes from after Road America.
It did look at one point like Rosenqvist was going to attempt a similar sort of long stint. I think he went into a bit of a fuel save mid-race. I don't know whether it went to plan, but I think he planned from sort of just before the halfway mark. He was only going to make one more stop or something, I believe I saw via his radio. But yeah, it was a bit of a. There's kind of been a little bit of a drop off. I think again it was just.
I think it was sort of not inevitable, but yeah. he was overachieving rather than him not performing well.
For sure, and I think the wet qualifying again. I think he felt they were pretty competitive.
He was ahead of Pietro Fittipaldi, who was ahead of Stingray Rob. As I said, bit of a. We haven't really ever seen Stingray Rob penalised before, but it's first to everything.
Yeah, I mean, it looked like something we've kind of seen from his teammate, didn't it? But I imagine it was probably just a misjudgment. It was clumsy, wasn't it? It was definitely worthy of a penalty. He had to cede all the positions that Rosenqvist had lost, which I quite like that as a penalty, actually. Just punish them by giving them the same punishment that the other drivers had.
Well, so doesn't quite work if you're Rasmussen. Chuck yourself into all in turn 14 next lap, will you? Bit weird though. Ferrucci's ahead of Ericsson and Armstrong in the standings. It all just was a bit too jumbled up, really, doesn't it? Even itself out. Then it was Alexander Rossi, who, a bit like Dixon, he just absolutely shredded his reds, which was a shame, because we were talking about how Rossi's been so consistent this year. He's been getting top 5 after top 10 quietly, and he's dropped from 5th to 9th in the standings. A pretty poor day, really. Again, not like Rossi. What's happened?
Well, this is the start of where we kind of get onto a few drivers who had confusing tales of woe, because apparently he had a wastegate failure about halfway through the race. I don't know what it is, but it sounds like it's something important. And he said it on his, I think he posted on Instagram. So that kind of, as well as being one to suffer on the alternates, I think he also had an issue mid-race where he was held up in the pits by someone coming in front of him. And then he had whatever a wastegate failure is. We're not kind of technical, but yeah, that happened and seemingly is important. So that was kind of what undid it, actually, for him, I believe.
Then we had Helio Castroneves. He brought home 19th place. Now, that's the last time he's going to be in the car, and for once, it's sort of for exciting reasons. But he was pretty quiet. I mean, he had a bit of a moment in qualifying, wasn't it? That's about it.
Yes,
we saw.
he caused a red flag in
Caused a
qualifying.
red flag, yeah. Then it was, I mean, Power caused a red flag in qualifying. We didn't even touch on that. But in the same place as Castro Neves, but it didn't work out too badly, did it? Then it was Rasmussen, who, as we know, just hit Simpson at the start and got penalised. And then it was the aforementioned Dixon ahead of Luca Giotto. I mean, Luca will update you on Coin, but he was back this weekend. He's going to be back for Laguna, so a bit more guarantees there for Coin. There's an important test coming the day of recording. Now, this is going to be quite important who Coin put in. There's been rumblings for months that's going to be Catherine Legg, but we don't actually know. So that might signify who they're going to field in the rest of ovals for the rest of the season. So keep an eye out for that one, because that could be quite significant. Giotto was back in, as we said, he got penalised at the start for hitting rail. Now, should we get on to Juncos Hollinger? It feels like every week there's just like last week it was Ferrucci and this week it's Juncos. There's just something we don't really, it's like an elephant in the room. We don't want to talk about it, but we've got to get onto it, which is just, where do we start? Well, we start off with Pourchaire's accident with Canapino in Detroit. Yes, it was clumsy. Yes, it was a mistake, but it's not one of those where it's like, it wasn't intentional. It wasn't ridiculously despicable.
It was completely inconsequential. Pourchaire got more damage than you know. I think Canapino lost 3 places. Pourchaire had his steering crooked for the rest.
Yeah,
of the
it was
just a racing incident.
Yeah, I mean, it was optimistic, maybe a bit on the rookie mistake side. It wasn't anything ridiculous. Obviously, it was something that deserved to be penalised, but whatever. As we've seen, unfortunately, too many times in the past, Canapino's very passionate fan base go on to social media, and long story short, they just completely overstepped the mark. You know, there's been once again death threats directed towards a driver who's got involved in an accident with Canapino, and I mean, we don't really need to go on to how stupid and embarrassing that is. I mean, it's a simply disgusting behaviour. It's got absolutely no place in a sport that is so great and so enjoyable the rest of the time. It's something we all love watching. It's something we all give up our time to watch because we enjoy it. And I mean, I don't think we're going to have many Argentines listen to this. And don't get me wrong, it's not all of Canapino's fan base. This is unfortunately a very, very small percentage of idiots destroying our sport. And, you know, I don't need to go into an essay on it, but sending that stuff is simply unacceptable under any circumstances, but particularly in these ones. That was simply abhorrent. Loads of statements going out from McLaren, Juncos, you know, and loads of support towards Pourchaire, understandably. Callum Ilott was one in particular who said it only makes you stronger. He was obviously the one who's had to suffer with that previously. And unsurprisingly comes the news that Juncos and McLaren's alliance has ended, because, you know, you can't be having an alliance between two teams when one of the team's drivers is being treated like that. And, you know, it doesn't help the fact that here's Canapino liking comments on Twitter, basically, you know, supporting these incidents, and he's done it multiple times. And he puts out a statement which is pretty poorly worded, saying, "Oh, I wasn't aware of any of the death threats." It didn't really help the situation at all, the statement he put out. You know, Ricardo Juncos said stuff over the radio which wasn't particularly pleasant either. And the alliance ends, understandably. There's not a chance you can have a working relationship after a situation like that. And then there was sort of murmurings about Canapino feeling a bit unsafe. But, you know, he turned up to the weekend at Road America. He was at the autograph session, and all of a sudden he's just disappeared. And Nolan Siegel steps out of his Indy NXT car, and he's in the Juncos car for the weekend. Now, we don't know what's happened. There's still, I think, a story to be told behind what's happened to Canapino. I think it's a hard situation, because a driver missing a race for mental health, I don't think is good, especially for a social media standpoint. I really, well, if that is the case, I do feel somewhat for Canapino, because no driver deserves to miss a race through their own mental condition. But at the same time, you look at the other side of the equation, and here's him not helping the situation at all, only lighting the fire even more by liking these tweets and putting out the statements. So it's a double-edged sword, and we won't ever know until we get the full story. But it's just such a mess, and just such a disappointing situation.
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of been collating my thoughts on this throughout the last week or so, and I guess the story beyond the collision at Detroit started the Monday afterwards, when I believe McLaren's statement came kind of that evening, our time over here in the UK, and Pourchaire put out his own tweet saying, he was sad to have received the abuse, received the death threats, and I feel for him. It's a terrible welcome to the series, and I think it's important to stress it isn't representative of anything but a minority of these Argentine fans, and it's not representative of the IndyCar community either. But I think, again, like we've seen with the ILOT situations, the silence from Juncos was pretty loud. Again, there was a retweet of the statement, and it was hours and hours before they had their own statement came out. I think maybe even on Tuesday, then Canapino made his pretty flimsy statement. And throughout all of this year, last year, I've never felt there's been a clear sort of condemnation of it. And we need like a video or something of Ricardo Juncos, Agustin Canapino saying something directly to these fans. I just felt it was all pretty hollow. And then the actions, obviously, of Canapino liking all of the stuff didn't really match the words that he'd said. And I think the mess kind of just would have been avoided if he had stayed silent and put out an actual good statement that had been passed through, Juncos PR or whatever. But no, instead he's been liking these tweets that are essentially defending the threats and saying the threats are fine because they're not going to be acted upon. They're just silly little things. And the Callum Pourchaire tweet kind of got the most traction from, it was an ESPN Latin America IndyCar commentator. And, I think Canapino even replied to one comment mocking that Callum Pourchaire remark, obviously essentially mocking the situation as ILOT experienced, what Pourchaire experienced. And he replied to one with laughter. And the statement was pathetic. He was denying the threats. He was saying that, just ignore them. But why would they be made up? And just because you ignore this sort of thing doesn't mean it's acceptable. And I think Juncos have towed that kind of line of ignoring it, getting on with just get on with it too much in this last year. And Canapino almost felt like he was defending it as being the passion of Argentinian fans. But I don't care if it's passion. It's still death threats, and it's not acceptable. And it almost felt with some of the stuff he was doing, and he was almost making a mockery of these kids in their 20s who were being threatened by his fans by simply kind of going along with it, with some of the stuff he was interacting with on social media, which I didn't like at all. He continued this even after putting out his statement. There were more tweets that were being kind of liked, and it was all just pretty grim. I don't feel like it's been taken serious enough by Canapino or the team. And at the end of the day, you might cite cultural differences, but they're in the US, and you've got to accept, the culture that this sort of thing is unacceptable. It's like mindless to think that you can get away with death threats. I don't know. Then obviously Friday happened, didn't it? Canapino pulling out. It was all seemed very mismanaged. Siegel pulled out of his Indy NXT car in practice, had an hour of notice before practice. He was still getting fitted in the car as practice commenced. I think it was apparently a team decision. NBC Sports said Canapino wanted to race, but I sincerely hope he's not being abused. I know some people are saying it kind of looks like the team are now just playing the victim card, which I can kind of understand why that's what's being seen. But I feel like they've almost put more of an effort into condemning the abuse that Canapino's received than the death threats that actually got us into this situation in the first place, which is not right. It's just a very odd situation and just a completely lamentable situation.
Like I said, I think the thing that's made it worse, like you said, is just how Canapino responded to the situation. Like you said, a written apology doesn't seem sincere when it's happened twice now, and it's happened at this kind of extent, and no one should experience death threats in this situation just for, I don't want to call it like a rookie error, but just something that shouldn't get this sort of traction. And I just, like you said, a written apology just isn't enough. It isn't getting the message across. It's not getting it across in the way that people are understanding and people are stopping this type of stuff, because it's not acceptable at all, and it reflects really badly on IndyCar, because it makes it seem like that is acceptable, that is kind of what happens, and that's the normal when it isn't. And like I said, it's reflecting so many Canapino fans which aren't like that, and this kind of extent stuff just shouldn't happen. And said, I agree that Juncos kind of isn't taking action. I feel like they're only taking action when people are pointing out that they aren't doing anything instead of responding, so it makes it seem like they don't, I don't want to say that they don't care, but they don't think it's as much of an issue as it is. And I think there's a few things that they could have done differently. I think they can put more statements out. I think they should do something which is a bit more personal, a bit more targeted rather than general. And I think just Canapino should maybe just stay silent in the situation instead of liking and responding to the tweets, and it's making it worse by responding to this.
On more positive waters, I thought Nolan Siegel did good. I mean, considering the circumstances, his first time in the dry was pretty much in warm-up. I thought, not the first time driven IndyCar in the wet, I thought, yeah, it was all right. I mean, your comment about him being fitted up as practice one starter made me laugh, because that's basically what Coin do every week. So
it was eerily similar. It was eerily similar, wasn't it? But
that's what he does at Coin at the start of every weekend.
I completely agree with what you said. I think the fact that he was the one they called upon was kind of more proof that the 500 has actually done nothing but good for his standing, despite not making the race.
And it might cheer him up a little bit.
I think it was a really good run. I think he was running around the likes of Santino, Ferrucci, and then I think he had to make an unplanned pit stop in the race, which was unfortunate. That kind of derailed it. But even just starting 21st, putting cars behind him, that's a really solid effort in really tricky conditions, and a car he's barely driven before. So yeah, really, really sort of impressed with how he dealt with it all.
He was at a VK. Do we know what problem VK had? Because
we might as well do VK and Harvey together, because I think they both had steering or suspension issues.
Fine. Because Harvey was 4 laps down and VK was 2 laps down. So
yeah. Just on VK, he was having a really good run, and I feel like we've had this a few times this year, where he has kind of been running fairly well and just doesn't really have a result to show for it because something or other happens.
Didn't punt Rosenqvist out like last year.
No, but Rosenqvist 2 years in a row has been punted out.
And then we had 26th place was Marcus Armstrong, who retired with, do we know what issue? It was a mechanical issue or something?
It was something mechanical. I saw his radio, and there was something to do with his dial just wasn't working. Like I don't know.
Something wasn't working.
Something wasn't working. Oh, sorry. His dash wasn't working.
Fine.
And his speed was. I don't know. He said he just felt like he was miles off the pace. So.
Fine. And then we have his teammate Kevin Simpson, who we touched on earlier. Unfortunately, was punted out by Rasmussen. Catching up some of the news from the last week. Let's state Road America. Jamie Chadwick was the first female driver to win in 14 years in Indy NXT, obviously previously called Indy Lights. First female to win on a road and street course. I'm sure you've seen it by now. It's obviously gained a lot of attention. Very good for a representation standpoint. I mean, as from a more personal note to us, from a British standpoint, that's obviously great as well. And nice to see a new face on top of the Indy NXT podium. There's been rumours about IndyCar. We probably won't get onto that for several weeks. But as a general thing, very, very happy with Jamie Chadwick. She's obviously had a few times, well, almost pretty much every race this year. She's lost a lot of positions, not through much fault of her own. A win that will be a win that's very well liked all the way around.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a feature up on the DIVEBOMB site that you can kind of read what she had to say about it, and just a little bit more on kind of the scale of the achievement. But yeah, I'm so happy for her. I mean, it is an amazing achievement, and a 14-year wait kind of, I guess, emphasizes the scale of what she has achieved. And she's the first woman to win on a road course in the series as well, which again is a pretty big achievement, because it's a physical challenge, and she's spoken a lot about the physical element. She's kind of tirelessly worked to get stronger this off season, and it feels like all of her work that she's put in has really been vindicated. There's a lot of faith both ways between her and Andretti. I think both camps deserve kind of a lot of credit, and it can't have been easy coming over from W Series, where she's a 3-time champion. She was only off the podium 3 times. She won over half of the races she competed in. there's loads of pressure, loads of eyes on her. And when she did doubt last year, when she did struggle last year, there were doubts that kind of rose. But she just dug in. And things really started to click. I think there was a bit of an upward trajectory started to emerge at the back end of last year, and then into this year, there's been a massive leap. I feel, she's kind of revised her approach. She's going full attack. She really feels like she's physically up to the task to compete, and she hasn't qualified outside the top 10. I think last year she only qualified inside the top 10 twice, which is really impressive. She's ninth in the championship, but if not for the issues you kind of mentioned, Dan, she could probably be top 5 because she was crashed into twice in St. Pete that ended the day. She had her own spin at Barber, but the second Indy road course race, she had a gearbox problem. Detroit, she got a puncture. And the only other race, she was on the podium in the first Indy road course race. So I feel like she's defied a lot of the doubts to get this win at the end of the day. And it was properly on merit because she led kind of start to finish, fended off 2 extremely good drivers, Foster coming off the back of 2 successive wins. And, she doesn't want to be known as a history maker. She kind of expressed that she really wants this to just be the norm and her not just be like, oh, a female winner. She wants it to just be something that's normal. But she is a real trailblazer, I think, for the next generation of young girls. And yeah, it's an incredible story. And I hope a lot of others follow suit.
Should we keep up with all the good news? David Malukas was renewed. Well, not renewed. He's signed for Meyershank Racing. I feel 2 ways about this because I don't think he should be signed to replace Tom Lundqvist, but I think it's great to have him back after his own struggles this year. Obviously, similarly to Tom Lundqvist being dropped by a team, and I think it's a good move. Meyershank have proved competitive with Rosenqvist at points this year. They've got a lot of ovals coming up. We know Malukas has sort of done very well in the ovals in his short career to date, and I think Malukas all round is very well liked. So I think it's a very popular move. It's good to see him back. We obviously don't know about the condition of his wrist, but he says the doctor says it's all right. So we'll take their word for it. He's going to be back starting from Laguna Seca. So great news. Very happy for David Malukas, and it's good to have him back because 1, he's a character, and 2, he's a great racing driver.
And as this episode is released, he will also be participating in the Milwaukee hybrid test as well. That'll be his first outing since the wrist injury. So I guess that's kind of the first test, the final test of where he is physically, but he will have done a lot of training that kind of will prove it. But yeah, I think like you, Dan, I'm very torn. We don't need to get into Lundqvist again. I feel like it's a harsh decision. I feel like it's a premature decision. He was only going to get better, but I think at the same time, when you look at, okay, you have made the decision to cut him loose. Yeah, who better than Malukas? He's, he should have had a top drive this year. He'd earned that top drive, that opportunity at McLaren with his couple of years at Coyne. He's still a bit unproven, but I don't feel like this is an opportunity too far away from what he kind of would have had at McLaren, and probably with even less pressure, given it's kind of just a smaller outfit. But I'm really happy for him, and it's a good opportunity for a team that has shown some real promise in the early stages of this season.
I think it's good just for him to be back in general. I feel like who knows what's happening at McLaren? Who knows if his wrist kind of he's got better, but who knows that what McLaren was saying in case of if he was going to sign him next year, and kind of to get a team and to kind of hopefully show them that he can do really well. It might put him back on the radar. Not that he'd really lose it, but just to kind of get out there and prove to them they can do it and kind of re-sign him on. Because, like we said, who knows what's kind of happening with McLaren? Who knows what was happening behind the scenes?
And if you're a fan of Road America, I've got more good news for you because that got his contract extended on a new multi-year deal. So if you like Road America, good news for you.
Everyone loves Road America. The drivers adore Road America.
Yeah,
Fittipaldi, for one, he was like, oh, this is like one of the best tracks I've ever driven on. It's like Spa. They all describe it to Spa and as like being like Spa. And we all know how much drivers like Spa as well.
Now, a bit more somber news was the passing of IndyCar legend and 1963 Indianapolis 500 winner Parnelli Jones this week at the age of 90. Unfortunately, we're not really too knowledgeable in the history, but we can definitely appreciate that Parnelli Jones is an absolute legend of our sport. One of the most diverse figures we've seen in motor racing, in its history. You don't really have quite the people who are able to mix and match so impressively like Parnelli Jones was. He's a NASCAR winner, I'm obviously an IndyCar winner and like likes of Carl Larson nowadays, done a lot of sprint cars and the dirt racing scene. So obviously our best wishes go out to his family in this difficult time. As we say goodbye to a legend of our sport.
Yeah, and I've done, a little bit of reading since this as well. And, he's won an Indy 500, but he could very easily have won 5 Indy 500s. I think he's got the highest average finish, is it? Or something along those lines of anybody.
He's got a pretty good qualifying record.
Oh no, sorry, it's not average finish. It's laps led. He's got he's quite high on the laps led list after only I think 8 races.
He's led over a third of his laps at Indy,
and only ran there I think 8 times. It was quite nice to see. I think Jagger Jones, who is his grandson, I believe won in one of the IMSA series at Mid Ohio this weekend, which was quite nice to see.
I think there's a lot of unsung heroes this weekend, so we're going to have to pick one out because I feel like there's so many to pick from this weekend. There's so many drivers really stood out. Does anyone have anyone straight off the bat? Because this is a tough call. I think a lot of people like Rahal, Grosjean, Herta, Palou to some extent, O'Ward to some extent. There's a lot of decent ones to pull out from here.
I've got 2 that drive for the same team.
Well, that's against the rules. You can only pick one.
And I've also got Rahal. Rahal, Grosjean, and Siegel are my 3.
Right, you must pick one. You go for Siegel.
I'm going to go for Siegel, I think. Just because he finished down in 23rd, I think people aren't really talking about him. But the fact he was running so competitively.
Must be the first winner of the award to be a lap down.
It was something out of his control, seemingly. So
I feel like Grosjean. I feel like people are noticing Grosjean. Maybe not as much. It's hard. I'm actually going to go Herta. I think in some ways, considering where he was on lap 1 and what we've seen him do, where he just throws it away, I think actually his recovery to 6th was quite quietly really impressive. So I'm going to go Herta.
You can answer this name, but I was going to go with Grosjean. I feel like it's a quiet race for him that kind of got him not towards the top, but it got him a good solid result, which without any kind of major incidents, I think.
If no one's going to go for Rahal, I'll revise mine to Rahal because I think he deserves a mention.
Let's look at the various different tournaments we're doing. We'll start off with the podium predictor tournament this week. Last week, as we all know, was a bit of a disaster. Not too good for many this week. Right, so predictions this week. I went for Newgarden, Herta, Palou. Archie went for Palou, Herta, Rossi. Ellie went for Palou, O'Ward, Herta. Josh went for Palou, Herta, Dixon. Formula Muller Shop went for Ericsson, VK, Palou. Tom went for Palou, Newgarden, Herta. The DIVEBOMB IndyCar fans went for Palou, Dixon, O'Ward. And the DIVEBOMB IndyCar writers went for Palou, Newgarden, Rossi. So that's 3 points to the writers and Tom, and then 2 points to me, which has actually really opened up the championship standings here because Josh still leads on 14. Soon followed by Tom on 13, myself on 12, the IndyCar writers on 11, and a little bit of a gap to Formula Model Shop and Archie on 8, and then a bit more of a gap to Ellie on 6, and the DIVEBOMB followers. Unfortunately, you're still last in 8th. So some work to do, followers, all right. But it's getting close at the top. Josh Mason's lead is slowly but surely narrowing down. So it's tight. I'm loving this. It's tight. I mean, we now get into where it's every weekend. I mean, what we're going to do for Iowa, I don't know, but that's an issue. We'll come to it. I mean, so we'll see what we do there. But yeah, that's it. It's getting pretty tight now at the top. So let's hopefully keep the good work up. I mean, you two got no points this week, so
I always do so horribly on the podium prediction. I don't know what it is.
Might have to start taking some gambles, going for something different.
I mean, the Formula Model Shop tried that and got 0.
True.
It's hard. It's hard stuff. Anyway, let's see how we all fared in the podium predictor tournament, the Firestone Fast 6 predictor tournament to see if the standings have changed there. Shockingly, none of us predicted Linus Lundqvist. How dare us? I mean, I'm sure we all saw that coming. Anyway, I told you all last week, Rossi was the absolute GOAT at Road America qualifying. He topped his group by a country mile, and I was feeling a bit cocky, to be honest. And then Rossi absolutely bottled the fast 12. So, Alexander, you let us down. But I've told you, he's good at Road America qualifying. I mean, it's pretty impressive to top your group. So I got 1 because I guessed Colton Herta. Archie, you got 1 because you went for willpower, and Ellie, you got 2 because you went for both Herta and power. So your lead is extended to 22. Archie, you're on 19, and I'm on 18. So there we are. Don't know what we're going to do for ovals. I just guess we're going to have to guess the fast 6, and
Probably top 6.
probably going to be it. Yeah. I mean, how are we going to do IRO again? I was going to call so many caveats to this. Is it like 1 guess for 2, or do you do 2 separate guesses, or?
It'll have to be 2
I
separate.
reckon 2 separate.
Or you could go bold and be so confident in your prediction, you guess it twice.
That would be quite
You could
something if both laps were.
Depending,
same
yeah, but
top
it's
6
always
time.
like, it's usually pretty similar, isn't it? Like Power took both poles last year. Newgarden was probably second last year. Maybe Milwaukee when it's really hot enough in the championship, one of us will take that risk.
So yeah, Road America concluding means the end of, well, almost the end of 5 successive weekends of on-track action when you factor in Indy 500 qualifying. There's the Milwaukee test, of course, but after that, it is finally a weekend off, apart from those who are doing Le Mans, which we'll probably speak about next week, maybe. Yeah, here's what Santino, Ferrucci and Pietro Fittipaldi had to say about the taxing nature of this 5-week period.
A couple questions offline. Archie O'Reilly, DIVEBOMB Motorsports. Go ahead, Archie.
Thanks, Dave. Santino, this is obviously the 5th successive weekend of cars being on track, and it's straight to the Milwaukee test as well. Just how much of a challenge is this congested period? And I guess what have you and your team as well done to manage that?
Yeah, obviously, I think rolling off of Indy and into Detroit was mentally tiring, I think, for everybody. And you're going into a tight street course. I think having a couple days to rest and sleep, and then, I finally got more than 8 hours at home this week, which was awesome. To come up here and do a full reset, I feel like I have a lot more energy. I feel, I can see it in the team. My Texas guys got to go back to Houston. I was very happy about that. And yeah, it's just racing immediately after Indy is always tough. It'd be nice to have the week off, but obviously with the sports this year, it's very, very technical to do. And with TV, there's a lot of things behind the scenes that we don't, unfortunately, get the benefit of. But yeah, I think everybody is looking forward to getting through this race weekend, going through the Milwaukee test, and then sitting at home on the couch.
Good to know. One last question, Archie O'Reilly, DIVEBOMB Motorsports. Go ahead.
Thanks, Dave. Pietro, this is obviously the 5th successive weekend we've had cars on track. It's straight to Milwaukee after this. Just how much of a challenge is this really congested period, and kind of how have you and your team managed that kind of period of on-track action?
Yeah, it's really tough, man. It's been super exhausting, and the team does a lot more work than the drivers. For example, the mechanics and engineers, they're always putting in so many hours just getting ready for either a test day or a race weekend. I still have my reserve driver role with Haas, so when there was a week off, I was at the Miami GP. So actually my sort of 6 weeks in a row is actually like 7 weeks in a row of back-to-back racing. So it's a lot, but I'm super happy that I'm been given this opportunity. And for me, the more races, the better. Earlier in the year, I got called to do the Daytona 24 hours on a Friday afternoon, and basically arrived there at like 3 a.m, got in the car and went straight to green flag racing this year. So
next week, as you said, we actually don't have a race to discuss at one point. We will quickly discuss Le Mans next week, as you mentioned. I've got a piece going up this week about some of the IndyCar drivers at Le Mans. Just to run through it for you, Scott Dixon's in the number 3 Cadillac Hypercar, Alex Palou's in the number 2. Interestingly enough, Tristan Vautier is the reserve driver for that car, if you didn't know. Callum Ilott is obviously in the 12 Jota. Fun little fact for you if you didn't know, Jota Sport is based in the same town as I am, so little extra personal incentive for me. Romain Grosjean is in the Lamborghini Hypercar in the number 19 entry. Nolan Siegel is in LMP2, as well as Kiffin Simpson. Colin Brown, who we saw at the start of the season, endurance is obviously his thing, so he'll be in the LMP2 class. And if you're looking for some ex-IndyCar faces, you have the likes of Sebastian Bourdais, a little podcast legend who's alongside Dixon, actually. Some other ex-IndyCar drivers include Ben Hanley, Rennie Binder, Jack Hawksworth, Frank Pereira, and if you really want to count it, Felipe Nasr, although he never actually raced. He was going to race, but never actually raced. So there we are. We'll keep an eye out for them. If any of them win, that will only add to it. As we said, we've got the Milwaukee test on the day this is released, so that's obviously going to be quite important. So keep an eye out for corner fielding. Because of Le Mans, neither Ganassi or Juncos will be there, so Juncos obviously don't quite know what's happening in regards to Canapino now, so we'll keep an eye out for that one. Next week, we actually have nothing planned, so it'll be a very suspenseful week for the listeners of the podcast as they find out what's going to happen for next week. But leaving Road America, it is Will Power on top of the standings and on top of the podium once again for the first time in 34 races. Quite an enjoyable one. And obviously we're going to be heading to the Unisaker in 2 weeks' time as we hit the mid-season points. So thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.